So Pallavi, since you mentioned that an expert needs to have legal knowledge, does that imply that he needs to have a law degree?
No, it doesn't. See, what's important for us to understand is this law is new. It's only 3 years old, right? So, obviously, it cannot specify a certain degree or a specific qualification, because what it is only concerned about is someone who understands this law. Now, if it has just come out, obviously, it cannot say that someone should be an expert of this law, right? There will still be a time before we have experts out there in the market who have experienced this particular profile, who have worked with n number of organization, has developed multiple policies for different industries, and also understood the complexities of being an external member or an ICC member. Now, we need to see that as an initial requirement, this cannot be made part of it, because then you will end up with not having an ICC at all. You will not find any external member who is an expert on this law from the beginning itself. So it's not right for us to expect that whatever is specified in the law as per the basic guideline, basic qualification for an external member, is something that we should be following. So what's the bare minimum, right? So someone with legal knowledge does not really mean that someone should be a lawyer. What we are saying is someone who understands what is the seriousness of the laws that exist, someone who has dealt in this particular arena. And the same thing applies to women rights. Women rights, we are saying because this law is for women. If it were for men, then we would be looking for someone who has worked in the area of men rights. Okay, so that's where this basic qualification is coming from. So what instead now, after 3 years, organizations should be looking for is an expert, someone who has been practicing in this particular field. And when I say practicing, I'm not saying a practice as a lawyer, like going to the courts and actually be a litigation lawyer. What we are saying is someone who has been part of this role for n number of organizations in a specific industry, understand the nuances, not just knows that these are the guidelines that are supposed to be followed, but be also able to figure out what are the issues that will affect an organization considering the industry that it is working in. See, an aviation industry is very different from manufacturing sector. We are dealing with very different audiences in the organization. Same thing with service sector, with IT sector. The work routine is very different. Work schedule is different. Same thing with startups. So these are the different setups that we are talking about, and we can keep picking different industries, Garima, and I can tell you very clearly how the policy formation will be different from each and every industry. So that's exactly what we mean by an expert. If you will talk to professionals who have been part of multiple, ICCs, who have been part of multiple ICCs as an external member, they will tell you very clearly, very distinctively how they have been working on designing those policies considering the way that specific entity works.
All right. So the other question is that in no college this law is taught. Like for example, I've also done my masters in law. So nor at the graduation level nor at the masters level there was any even talking about this law, that such law prevails.
Right.
So how do you expect someone to be an expert, to understand what the law says, or to be able to follow the guidelines?
I think it's like any other profession, it's a matter of continuous learning, right? It's a new field, it's a new practice area, it's a new qualification that is required. An in-depth understanding and study of this law is required. Not only an individual is required to have a very good understanding of how organization dynamics work, but we also be able to understand how the legal system works, and at the same time understand what are the nitty-gritties of this law. So like I mentioned a while ago, anyone can, after reading couple of articles online, can come and tell you that if you have to be compliant with this law, you have to constitute an anti-sexual harassment policy, you have to put up notices, you have to make sexual harassment as a punishable offense in your organization, You have to include it as part of your employment contract, and so on and so forth. You have to have 100% sensitization. I might as well mention these additional things also. You have to constitute an internal complaints committee, and the formation and the composition we have already discussed. You have to have an external member on board. You have to train the ICC members. But then there's more to it. You know, an expert on this particular matter will be able to sit with you, understand the values, the existing policies that are in place for the organization, and then create a customized anti-sexual harassment policy for you where there is no conflict. Let's take an example. Okay, you may have a code of conduct policy which currently has some clauses which talks about discrimination. Okay, that we take a strong stance against discrimination, and these are the do's and don'ts, and these are the repercussions of it. Okay, now imagine in your anti-sexual harassment policy, if there is a conflict, you have mentioned similar instances in your code of conduct policy also, and you have them there in your anti-sexual harassment policy also. Now, how do you manage that conflict? You have to be very clearly be able to distinguish what are the instances and offenses that actually qualify specifically under the anti-sexual harassment policy. Because when a matter will come to an ICC, okay, there will be a lot of gray areas. You will not always come across instances where you will be able to say that yes, this is sexual harassment. There will be a lot of gray instances that will come your way, and at that point your policy should be able to clear that out. What's the next thing? Documentation. That's another element of being compliant that is required, that this law has very specifically mentioned the importance of documentation at every step and stage. How important and in what manner documentation has to be maintained, it's clearly mentioned in this law. Third is communication protocol. How a complaint should come in, to how it should be processed, from either reaching out to the complainant, to the person who has been accused, to the witnesses who will be involved in the investigations. It's mentioned in this law. Same thing with the investigation process. Everything is mentioned under this law, so you have to follow the guidelines to the point. And this, you will not generally find them online in the articles. Until and unless you sit down and decode the act which is there, you will not be able to read about this just generally out there in the online portals. Yes, of course, books have been written about it, but then yes, books is one of the mediums you can actually figure out in detail about it. For basic information, there are always some online portals and articles. A lot has been written about. Third way, there are courses which are coming out. In fact, one of the courses, the expert course, which is being conducted by NUJS Kolkata also. So, and lastly, of course, if you get lucky enough to find someone who has self-learned, because I'm a self-learned person. I am not a lawyer. My interest lies in gender neutral issues, especially at workplaces. So I'm a self-learned person. I took interest in this particular law, and that's the only reason I have been able to practice. So if being a lawyer was one of the requirement, I think I will not be on the board of ICC of any company by now. So yeah.